going to be revolutionizing the bishop. When you think about a smock bishop, I have been sitting on this information for like 10 years, just a side note. But when you think about the smock bishop, we love how beautiful it is and the whole collar situation and the smocky and how fluid it is. Is it possible though to make it more fluid? Yes. And with making this more fluid, we are going to eliminate, I think, what everyone's gripe is about the smock bishop, which is those shoulder seams. Sure, you can do a small tiny French seam and hope that it goes through the right direction on your pleat, like in the smocking situation and on the pleater, that it disappears into the seam. That's one route. I've done it. It is what it is. Another route is to take the shoulder seams in and out of, not to have the seam, take the fabric in and out of your pleater. I've done videos on that, and that's my go-to method as of the last whatever. But this method, like I said, I've been sitting on it for about 10 years. I'm finally ready to share it with everybody, to say that it's revolutionizing the smock bishop. I do not think it is extreme. I think it's revolutionary. It's a revolution. What? Let's begin. So what am I talking about? Okay, there are two routes we can take with this. One route, pros and cons to each. One route, we're going to have a seam in the back. I guess it could be on the shoulder. You're gonna have one seam somewhere. You're gonna either place it on the shoulder, you can place it in the back, you can have the front placket method, front facing method. You're gonna have an opening somewhere. But the other method, and it's gonna be a bit of a labor of love, which is why I have this board here. It's gonna help me out with it. It's gonna help me out with other projects too, though. That method, though, I am so excited to get into because it's simply going to have a placket. There's gonna be no seams. So like I'm saying, it's a revolution. I need to learn how to pronounce that word. It's really reinventing the smock bishop. The first method I had been sitting on for about 10 years. I remember going to a Saga meeting and, hearing the gripes, and I understand it. I have the same gripes, which is why I've been taking my seams not my seams, before I do the seams, I've been taking my fabric in and out of my pleater. Is it cumbersome? Yeah, I mean, there's worse things in life, but it does take some time and some patience. You gotta rethread the needles, take them out, and all the things, right? But is it worth it? Yes. However, this method, it just eliminates all of that. You just don't have any seams. Because I remember going to the meeting and hearing the gripes about, the smock bishops and the shoulder seams, and it's just, And I remember driving home, and I had my little beetle bug back in the day. I remember driving home and being like, well then, if you don't want the shoulder seams, which I understand, then don't have shoulder seams. That solves that issue, right? So both methods, you're not gonna have shoulder seams. Both methods. First method, you're gonna have an opening all the way down somewhere. And now, with either method, you've gotta think about sleeves and what to do with the sleeves, and we'll get into all the nitty gritty on that. Oh, I am so excited to finally be sharing this, though. It's been a process on how to share it and how to present it and as I've been sitting on how to share it, evolved the second method, which I'm so excited for. The first method is great, and I've never seen this done, okay? So I might be crazy. I'm sure it's been done. I do not think that I am the first to no, okay, somebody I'm sure has done this before me, but what I'm trying to say is I have never seen this done, so I'm just giving you the information that has been brewing up in here. If you think that it's crazy or that I am incorrect or whatever, that's fine. It doesn't have to be your cup of tea. I'm just sharing. I'm just sharing for whatever it's worth. Don't come at me.
So let's start with method 1. It's simple and you can use your smocking pleater. And then method 2 will build on this concept and take things to the next level. The first step is to figure out the measurements for your rectangle. The width of the rectangle is going to be a function of the size you're making, the fabric you're using, which gives a range for the pleating ratio, combined with your preferences. So basically, you start with some size you're making, and then you pick out some fabric, and that fabric will have some pleating ratio attached to it. And then you can alter things as you wish within the pleating ratio of the fabric so it's to your preference. You know, some folks like their bishops to be a more like concise gathered look, and then others like a more slender kind of flowy vibe. And then there's some of us that bounce back and forth. So the width is going to be made up of the pleating ratio for your given fabric, referencing how you'd like things to look, and then apply those two ideas to the size you'd like to make. Keep in mind that sizing for bishops is really forgiving, and I have a chart that guides you through this process, as well as videos that go over the concept of pleating ratios for various fabrics that I'll link below. And then for the length of the bishop, well, that's simply going to be however long you'd like your finished garment to be, and then add whatever allowances you need for the neckline seam as well as the hem. Again, I have a reference value for you in the chart for this whole bishop revolution we've got going on. Before you begin pleating, it can be helpful to mark the center front of your fabric, like the halfway mark. I guess this could be the center back depending on the style that you're making, but you want to mark the center mark, the halfway point. Whether that halfway point is going to become the center front or the center back, you want to mark halfway of your fabric, as well as the quarter marks. These quarter marks are roughly where the shoulder seams would have been, and this series of marks can be helpful when we get to the blocking part. So the process of pleating is so lovely. Just send your fabric through one whole piece without any seams or dancing around, unthreading and rethreading, and there you go. Except if your fabric is too thick.
Oh my God, do not break. These are brand new.
These were a fresh batch of needles, like legit out of from the mail, never been used. So yeah, I took everything out, used those iron-on dots, and hand pleated her up. It added about 10 hours to this project, so definitely not ideal, but still very doable and a good card to play when necessary. It's a good option, right? If it's necessary, it's a good option. Either way, now we can move on to the blocking step. Get that center mark, even if it's going to be the center back in your case, get that center mark and place it on the center front of your blocking board. And then those quarter marks are going to line up around the shoulder seam of the blocking board. So this blocking board, it's become a little bit difficult to get your hands on lately. If you would like to have one, I guess your choice is to try to find one online and hope to get lucky, or you can kind of do a DIY version. I have a blocking board DIY PDF download available on my website. Either way, from there, it's a matter of blocking like usual, and I have plenty of videos that go over how to block a bishop, and I will link them down below. In those videos, I talk about freezer paper, and I really do love that method, especially if you're pressed for time. But my older, not living under a baby self has discovered the love of basting. So here I put in 2 rows of basting smocking stitches, and then I also basted the neck bias band in place before securing it in place on my machine. Just putting it out there, lots of different ways to approach things. From here, you would finish the bias band at the neckline as normal, and again, I have videos. They're linked below. So method 2 and this, guys, bring on the revolution. I really need to get my marketing team to help me with the pronunciation. Bring on the revolution, all right? I am so excited about this route. Before you pick a fabric, please think about your hem length first. While I did a little test run, this is my first time I made this route all the way. So naturally, I learned some lessons along the process. And one of the lessons was to pick a fabric that was wide enough. And you'll see this is a theme that keeps popping up, and I will keep explaining all the lessons that I learned, okay? So bear with me. So I really wanted to use this Liberty of London but it wouldn't have been long enough for a bishop gown. Although a bishop blouse, yes, those are lovely. I'd highly recommend. Just keep that idea afloat, right? Instead, I grabbed some of this floral fabric sprinkled with these little birds. It's plenty wide for the size that I would like to make, at least I thought so, and I will get into more on that in a bit. So I begin by marking the center of the fabric. Now, it does not need to be the true center of the fabric, and you can argue that you're not actually going to be able to mark the true center of the fabric, but alas, I am fun at parties. So this little intersection will become the center, right? So even if there's some error while marking, which there is, we're going to establish this intersection mark as the center of the point. We're just going to call it that. Makes sense? And we'll reference the rest of this process from this mark. So one leg of this intersection should be placed on the straight grain, while the other leg on the cross grain of your fabric. I place my sheet of dots between my foam board and my fabric, placing a series of pins as I make sure the grain is true. No wrinkles, the fabric is flat, all that good jazz. And I use an erasable pen to put all those dots in place. And I thought I needed to put in the lines, but that proved to be unnecessary. They are helpful visually just when you're placing the dots, so they're still there on the printout, but you don't actually need to put the lines there. And actually, it just started to clutter things up visually. Oh, and that book, I'm using it to rest my elbow on so I don't get any squashed indentions across my foam board. As you can see by the sunrise, this is a little bit of a process. Method 2 is definitely a labor of love. This circular sheet of dots works off the idea that it's the little things that add up, right? In the most lovely way, we are going to hone into this concept. So basically, the bishop is going to be eased into place with concentric circles. No bumps, pulls, or whatever. Things will appear to be effortless. Oh my goodness, the pronunciation team around here. Things will appear to just fall into place because, well, they are going to be effortlessly falling into place, but it will take a bit of effort on our part to make this situation happen. So as I've said, method 2 is a labor of love. Now, which circle to pick for your bishop? Well, the 3 variables from method 1, the size you're making, the fabric you're using, and the look you're going for, are still the factors that we need to consider. Now, as I've already said, bishops are really friendly, forgiving with their sizing, so don't stress out. So if you're going to be using a regular batiste, if you're going to be using a regular batiste weight fabric on an average size child, then go for the size that's marked on the circle. But let's say that you're going for a lighter weight fabric, then you may want to go the next larger circle and then block it down to the smaller size. That way you have more fabric going into the size for your child. Since your fabric, is lighter weight, you're getting more of it, and it's still going down into the neckline size that you need for your kiddo. Makes sense? And then that third variable of style for your bishop still plays a role. If you want a bishop to have more space in between pleats, that's entirely up to you. And if you want a really full bishop, again, it's sewing, you do you. I stay stitched about 1/4 inch away from my first circle of pleating dots. I just use my presser foot and the marked dots to establish this quarter of an inch spacing. I also stitch over that center intersection cross. And as I keep saying, this method 2 bishop is a labor of love. It must be pleated by hand. There is no way to go around with the current smocking pleaters available on the market. you would need to have something with like a variable needle curvature or, different gearing in order to pleat your fabric at different ratios. You get what I'm trying to say? So basically, you need to pleat this by hand. We don't have access to a tool to get around it otherwise. It's a wonderful project to do while watching a movie, listening to a podcast, going on a road trip. You're creating something that is really special. So yeah, it's not supposed to take 10 minutes. It's all good. Oh, and I love using hand quilting thread to do all my pleating for smocking, both in my smocking pleater as well as by hand. And another lesson from my first round, start your pleating at one of the legs of your intersection.
This is my front. This is where my lines are, my knots are. It's not ideal. I should have thought about that. All right, so think about that when you're doing yours. Don't do what I did.
I just did mine randomly. And while I made it work, it would have been better had it been along one of those legs. So now, check this out, y'all. I am growing up. My new not living under a baby self is putting in clip marks at one line at that center front intersection so I can slide in a hanger and let this circle do its thing hanging out for a few days. This will allow the bias to relax, which should give in a more accurate hemline down the road. At least that's the theory, but again, my not living under a baby self is new to this freedom in life. Anywho, after a few days go by, I take this back to my foam board and place things down as best as possible. My fabric did not lay entirely flat. Maybe that's because it's been relaxed due to this whole hanging thing, so maybe it's actually a good thing that's not laying flat. Or maybe it's because I have no idea what I am doing. Regardless, I just smoothed it out and kind of split the difference, and things worked out just fine. So if you're in the same boat, it's all good. Oh, and the inside of the circles also bubbled up. Again, just ignore that part. If yours does the same, it's all good. It all worked out just fine. So to get the hem marked, I measured how long I wanted my hem to be. You can get this from the chart in the Bishop Revolution Guide, measuring your kiddo, measuring their clothing, using a previous bishop pattern. You get the drift, but keep in mind that all those measurements are going to go from the neckline to the hem. So you need to add in the length from the neckline to that intersection mark. Make sense? I hope so. I used an erasable pin attached to a ribbon that was mounted to the center of the foam board. I know it's a sophisticated operation over here. And I carefully marked the circle hem. I made sure to keep my pin as perpendicular to my surface as possible. And I had two spots that came up a little bit short for the circle hem. So I scabbed on some fabric and then I continued marking. These little scab pieces will be enclosed in the fabric hem to come, so it'll just be our little secret. Once the hem was marked, I stay stitched around that circle. This hem can be finished in a multitude of ways. A hand-sewn rolled hem, I have a video. A tiny machine hem, there are lots of videos on YouTube. A lace hem, I've got a video. A fabric hem, I also have a video. I'm going the fabric band. Are y'all noticing a theme? There's lots of resources out there, okay? So for this route though, I'm going to be utilizing a fabric band for mine, using this little template as a guide. And once again, start pleating along one of the legs of your center intersection mark. This is the first time I'm putting a bishop together using this method, so that's one of the lessons I learned from going through the process entirely. Anywho, I cut along the pleating threads at one of the legs for the intersection mark. Structurally, it doesn't matter which mark you pick, which leg you pick. Okay, it just needs to be along the cross grain or the straighter grain. But take a look at your fabric and see what you'd like to be the front of your bishop. And this may not matter, if you have a solid fabric, but in my case, I like the position of the birds better one way, so that became my center front. You feel me? I'm removing enough of the threads so that I have some seam allowance, some space for a placket, And things are getting really exciting at this point. You should remove the inside fabric. You see, I kind of just jumped the gun in my excitement and started blocking, and then I got myself a wad of fabric. So I had to trim that away, back up, breathe, you know. I know, fun at parties. I was really excited about this project coming together. Blocking Bishop kind of feels like a dance to me. I do an initial pin, kind of roughly placing the center, front, shoulder marks, facing or placket marks, and then I get a bulk of the pleats to come together, like just one big gathering round. Okay, I just get the bulk of the gathering over. And then I fine-tune things. So I reestablish the center front, the shoulder seams, and I add more pins along the neckline to maintain a circular shape. The more pins, the better. And getting these pins all the way down is important. The head of the pin should be touching the fabric to prevent the fabric from moving around. And now I can fine-tune the pleats. First, making sure that the fabric is flat to the surface, but it's not pulled too tight, okay? Too tight is also bad, but you just want it just to be flat. And then I can move the pleats around until they're evenly distributed. Like I said, it's a bit of a dance. And continuing on, we can line this bishop. I know. I was kind of like a kid in a candy store. It was like having discovered the best revolutionary ice cream and then wanting to add all the toppings I could get, all the sparkle. So I used the neckline circle from my bishop, transferred that to the center-ish of my fabric, and then used that same ribbon to create a circular hem. I stayed stitched around this hem, and then I initially was going to do that whole tiny hem on the machine, you know, turn it twice, that whole deal, but that wasn't going so well. And honestly, I muscled my way through this attempt much too long. I eventually finally stopped, and I finished it by hand. I tell you, the more I do by hand, the happier I am with the results. Machines definitely have their place, especially if you're living under a baby, but hand sewing, gotta say, it's quite the lovely tool to have. So once the hem was done, then I matched the lining to the bishop, and then I'm placing them right sides together since I'm going to be integrating the placket when I join these two pieces together. Make sense? Of course, you could skip this whole lining thing and just do a regular placket. And I've got a video on how to do that, and I will link her down below. In my case with the lining, I flipped the lining around, matched the lining necklines, and basted things together. I first basted 2 rows of smocking at the neckline, and then I joined the lining into the mix. From there, you would finish the bias band as normal. Again, I have videos, they're linked down below. And one note of caution when smocking for this method 2 route. Make sure to smock so that the outer circles maintain their expansion. Basically, you don't want a smocking design or using smock, like the tension you're using while you're smocking, even if your design is okay. You want to make sure your tension is such that it won't tighten up all of this built-in ease, because then you've got a bishop with that whole turtleneck effect instead of this lovely, fluid, continuous vibe we've got going on. But what about those sleeves? Okay, while I love these 2 methods, really I think it's a bit of a revolution. But the sleeve situation may be considered a little bit of a con. The sleeve options are pretty, yes, but I do think that the standard route of creating a bishop has a little bit of a leg up, just being honest. Everything has its pros and cons, right? But anywho, what to do about the sleeves? Well, watch this part entirely. Really, you should watch the entire video entirely, because this is a kind of a big picture to get before you go breaking down the pieces. And this part about the sleeve is no different. Please watch this part of the video entirely so you understand the whole picture where we're going with this. One part of the picture is figuring out where to place the sleeves. You can reference your kiddo or one of their garments for this top measurement, or a previous bishop. So measuring from the neckline to the top of the sleeve opening, You'll mark the top of the opening, measure down for the bottom of the opening, and then add on the sides of the sleeve, and then connect these 4 marks in an oval fashion. Don't overthink it, it just needs to be an ovalish shape. You can also hang your garment and kind of draw around it so it makes sense. It's a totally legit method. Whatever route, though, that you take, how do you take this oval and finish it out as a sleeve? Well, you can use bias bands or zigzag around to enclose the raw edges, trim up those edges, and then place some lace, turning the lace, like turning the zigzag edge under. Or you can use some entredeux along with some lace. I would attach the entredeux with 2 rows of straight stitches about 1/8 of an inch apart, trim up the raw edges, and then zigzag over them. And then you can attach the lace on the other side of the entredeux. Really, there are endless options out there. You could do some edge embroidery and then trim away the raw edges. Just let your creation go. It's all good. There are also other options for the sleeve shape. You can cut it into a more cap sleeve type deal. Just be creative and enjoy the process. Another thing to mention about the sleeves, you may want to take up some of the fabric underneath the sleeve depending on the shape that you went for, and of course your preference. It's sewing after all, so you do you. If you wish to take up some of the fabric, you could do this with some gathers or some knife pleats and then incorporate those into your sleeve treatment. Or you could use some elastic. You could even do some smocking pleats. Lots of ideas. Let the revolution begin.